A man opens his mouth. Moments later, something horrifying appears. Not blood, not food, but living creatures, cockroaches, worms, and even strands of animal hair are pulled out from his throat. Millions of people watched the footage and asked the same question. This is the story of a mysterious voodoo healing ritual, and whether the terrifying event was real or simply a very convincing trick.
This video demo is the property of VL Tape Society.
Several years ago, a disturbing video began spreading across the internet. In the footage, a man sits quietly while a spiritual healer performs what appears to be a ritual. At first, nothing unusual happens, but within moments, the situation becomes deeply unsettling because the healer reaches into the man's mouth and pulls something out. Not liquid, not food, but a living creature. The man involved in the video was named Pablo Moreira, a resident of Cuba. Before everything happened, Pablo lived an ordinary life. Nothing about him suggested he would one day become the center of a viral mystery. But then, his health suddenly began to change, and not in a small way. Pablo claimed something was wrong with his body, not the kind of illness that doctors could easily explain. According to him, it felt like something inside his body was slowly destroying him. At first, the symptoms seemed manageable, but over time, they became impossible to ignore. His body started to weaken. He lost weight rapidly. His arms and legs grew thin and fragile, almost as if he had been starving for months. Yet strangely, while the rest of his body shrank, his stomach began to grow larger. His abdomen expanded dramatically. It looked as if his stomach were swollen with something unnatural. The discomfort became unbearable. Pablo said that every time he tried to eat, it felt like something inside his stomach was blocking the food, as if there was an invisible barrier preventing digestion. Day after day, the pain continued. Illness followed illness, and nothing seemed to improve. Eventually, Pablo reached a frightening conclusion. He no longer believed his condition was a medical problem. In his mind, something supernatural was responsible. He became convinced that someone had cursed him. In Cuba, where Pablo lived, mystical beliefs are still deeply rooted in everyday life. When modern medicine cannot provide answers, many people turn to spiritual solutions. Ritual healers, shamans, and practitioners of traditional beliefs are often seen as a last hope. And that was exactly the direction Pablo decided to take. One of Pablo's friends told him about a similar experience he once had. According to this friend, he had suffered from a mysterious spiritual disturbance, but after visiting a spiritual healer, his condition suddenly improved. The healer he mentioned was known as a santero. At that point, Pablo felt he had nothing left to lose. Medical answers had failed him. Pain was constant, and the fear of an unseen curse continued to grow. So he agreed to visit the santero his friend had recommended. What happened next would later be recorded in a video that shocked millions of viewers around the world. Inside a small room, the ritual began. The atmosphere was tense and unsettling. Pablo lay down on the floor while the santero prepared the ceremony. Everyone present seemed serious, as if they truly believed the ritual would remove something dangerous from Pablo's body. The first step involved a raw egg. Without much explanation, the santero placed the egg into Pablo's mouth. In certain mystical traditions, eggs are believed to absorb negative energy or spiritual contamination. The healer claimed the egg would help break whatever dark force was affecting Pablo. Pablo closed his eyes and endured the uncomfortable moment. He remained still, trusting that the ritual might finally cure him. But the most disturbing part of the ceremony had not started yet. After the egg ritual ended, the santero did something even stranger. He slowly inserted his hand into Pablo's mouth, deep enough that it looked as though he was searching inside the man's throat. Then he pulled his hand back out, and something appeared between his fingers. It was alive. A cockroach, a large black cockroach. The insect looked as if it had just come from inside Pablo's body. But the ritual didn't stop there. Moments later, the santero reached inside Pablo's mouth again. This time, he pulled out something long and moving, a worm. Pablo began coughing violently. His body tensed each time another object was removed. The process looked painful and disturbing, yet the healer continued. More worms appeared, more insects, and then something even stranger, long strands of coarse animal hair, later described as horsehair. One by one, these objects were removed and collected. By the end of the ritual, the healer placed everything inside a glass container: cockroaches, worms, hair, and other debris. For Pablo, the meaning was obvious. Something evil had been living inside his body. Now, it had finally been removed. The curse, according to the santero, was gone, and for the first time in a long time, Pablo felt relief. Not long after the ritual ended, the video of the event began spreading across the internet. Within days, millions of people had seen it, and almost immediately, the public became divided. Some believed the footage was undeniable proof of supernatural power. Others believed something very different. When Pablo's ritual reached the internet, reactions were immediate. Millions of viewers watched the clip in disbelief. Some people were convinced they had just witnessed real dark magic. Others thought the entire scene looked staged. And a few viewers focused on a different question entirely. If those creatures really came from inside Pablo's body, how could he still be alive? The human stomach is one of the most hostile environments for living organisms. Inside it, powerful acids constantly break down food. These digestive acids are strong enough to dissolve many types of organic material. Because of that, the idea that insects could live inside a human stomach raised serious doubts. Many viewers began questioning whether what they saw was actually possible. Medical experts were among the first to respond. From a biological standpoint, the explanation seemed simple. Cockroaches, worms, and hair could not survive in the stomach long enough to be pulled out alive. The acidic environment would destroy them quickly. which meant that if the creatures in the video were alive, they probably never came from Pablo's stomach at all. That realization shifted the discussion. Instead of asking whether Pablo was cursed, people started asking something else. Was the healer performing a trick? Professional magicians were also intrigued by the video. Some illusionists who analyzed the footage believed the ritual looked very similar to a classic technique used in stage magic, a technique known as sleight of hand. This method allows performers to secretly hide objects and reveal them at the perfect moment, creating the illusion that something impossible just happened. In magic performances, sleight of hand often relies on misdirection. While the audience focuses on one action, the performer secretly prepares another. To the viewer, it appears as if objects materialize out of nowhere, but in reality, they were hidden all along. Magicians who studied the footage suggested a possible explanation. According to them, the insects and hair might have been concealed in the healer's hand before the ritual began. When the santero reached into Pablo's mouth, he could have secretly released the objects and then pulled them out as if they had been removed from inside the body. To an observer unfamiliar with illusion techniques, the effect would look completely real. Of course, this explanation didn't convince everyone. Supporters of spiritual healing strongly rejected the idea that the ritual was fake. For them, the ceremony followed traditions that had existed for generations. They believed the santero was removing spiritual contamination that had taken physical form. In other words, the creatures represented the curse leaving Pablo's body. This difference in belief created two completely different interpretations of the same video. One side saw supernatural healing, the other saw a clever performance, and the truth became harder to determine. But there was another part of the story that made the situation even more complicated, because whether the ritual was real or not, something unusual happened afterward. Pablo claimed his condition improved. His pain started to disappear, and the symptoms that had been haunting him slowly faded. To people who believed in the ritual, that recovery was proof. They argued that the healer had successfully removed whatever dark force had been affecting Pablo. But scientists and psychologists offered a very different explanation, one that had nothing to do with magic. They pointed to a phenomenon known as the placebo effect. This occurs when someone experiences real improvements in health simply because they believe a treatment will work, even if the treatment itself has no medical effect. The mind, in some cases, can influence the body more than we realize. But the placebo effect is only one side of the story. There is also a darker counterpart, something researchers call the nocebo effect. Instead of healing someone, this effect can make people genuinely sick simply because they believe something harmful has happened to them. If a person becomes convinced that they are cursed, poisoned, or spiritually attacked, the stress and fear alone can trigger serious physical symptoms: pain, weakness, digestive problems, rapid weight loss, even collapse. The body begins reacting as if the threat is real. This concept has been studied for decades. One of the earliest researchers to explore it was an American physiologist named Walter Cannon. In the 1940s, Cannon investigated reports of people dying after they believed they had been cursed through voodoo rituals. He referred to this phenomenon as voodoo death. According to Cannon's theory, extreme fear can push the body into a dangerous stress response. Heart rate increases, blood pressure changes, hormones flood the system. If the stress becomes intense enough, the body can begin to shut down, not because of magic, but because of overwhelming psychological pressure. In other words, belief itself can sometimes become powerful enough to harm a person physically. And if that belief is later removed, the body can begin to recover. Some psychologists think Pablo's story may fit this pattern. If he truly believed someone had cursed him, the fear alone might have triggered many of his symptoms. Then, when the santero performed the ritual and convinced him the curse was gone, his mind finally relaxed, and his body followed. From that perspective, the insects and hair in the ritual might not have needed to be real evidence of a curse. They only needed to be convincing enough to make Pablo believe the problem had been solved. And once he believed it, his condition improved. But even with these explanations, the video continues to circulate online. Every few years, it resurfaces again. And every time it does, the debate starts all over. Was it a genuine spiritual ritual, a clever illusion, or an example of how powerful belief can be? One thing is certain: the human mind is capable of extraordinary influence over the body. Sometimes that influence can heal, and sometimes it can make people believe the impossible. Stories like this remind us that the line between belief, psychology, and reality can be surprisingly thin. What people see in the video often depends on what they already believe. But whether it was magic, illusion, or simply the power of the human mind, the mystery behind Pablo's ritual still leaves one unsettling question. How much of what we experience is shaped not by reality, but what we believe is real? And this is VL Tape Society.